Welcome, everybody. We are here with our Milne call to discuss increasing achievement with spaced retrieval practice. I'm really excited to discuss this with you today because I've been working with a few of our client schools, and we've had several teacher teams that have expressed that they've already seen increased achievement over this school year when this is one of the only things that they've changed. So they've had all their curriculum materials kind of stay the same and all of that, and they're like, this is really making a big difference. So I'm excited to share this with you to hopefully take back to your teams. So as we get started, my name is Rebecca Kessler. I'm one of the consultants here at Step Up. I am a current doctoral student in curriculum and instruction, and so these are some of the methods that we're studying a lot in my coursework. But I had learned a lot about this during my undergrad, so I used this in the classroom as a teacher, and now as a consultant, I'm able to share more of that information with others. And we actually have a few other consultants on the call, so if our other friends would like to introduce ourselves, and then we'll get started.
Hi, good morning, everyone.
Jesse.
My name is Valerie Montgomery, and I'm the Senior Director of Marketing and Operations here at Step Up.
Hi, my name is Jess Gray, and I'm the lead literacy consultant and trainer with Step Up.
Hi, my name is Sarah Rail, and I am a consultant and trainer and pre-K lead consultant. So glad to be on the call with you, Rebecca.
Thank you all. Okay, so for today, I'm not going to say retrieval practice 7 times like on the screen, but we are going to focus on the research behind this idea of where this comes from, how it makes our brains more effective, some of the benefits, and then I'm going to go into 3 activities that any teacher can use, 3 tools that are really simple and are likely in all of your teachers' classrooms. And then retrieval practice as assessment prep. So how we get kids ready to take the MAP test or EOCs and really show what they know over time. And then I've just got a few important notes for effective implementation and how we don't misuse this. So just to start us off, we're going to think about the 3 stages of learning and how our brain processes information. I've got a little clip of Inside Out a little bit later on. So if you've seen Inside Out, it's a great way to explain to kids how our brains learn information, hold information. So that first step is that we're encoding. We're taking in information. We are starting to sort through things and filter things in and out. Our brain processes a lot of information every few seconds. And so for kids, we are trying to shove all this into their brain all at one time. And then they have to go from that encoding process to storing it. So oftentimes that's in their working memory. And a lot of the information that we teach doesn't make it to their long-term memory. And that is by design. Our brains, although they are very strong at learning, our brains are actually meant to eliminate information that is unnecessary or not needed. So if our brain's like, nah, that's not connected to my schema in any way, I'm going to shift that on out because it's probably not needing to stay here. So our brains do a pretty good job of filtering, but when it comes to educational content, we want to make information stick for kids. So we have to find ways to build up those synapses over time to strengthen those like neurological pathways. And the way that we do that best is through retrieval practice. So retrieval is when we access information and we bring it back to mind. So as we're thinking through things like if you're trying to remember like what you had for breakfast yesterday, that's something that your brain would say, that's not important or necessary. It's going to shift it on out. But I bet most of us can remember some of the most important presidents and not all of the presidents of the United States unless you have a cute little song to keep them up there with. But as we do that, if I asked you which president did something impactful or important in American history, your brain would bring that back to mind, and that neurological pathway would then be strengthened. So oftentimes we teach kids a lot of content, but we have to teach them how to remember content. And that's whenever a lot of times teachers get frustrated and they're like, I know I taught this. Like, why are they not remembering it? It's because we haven't set kids up in a way where we've taught them how to remember that content over time. So things like study skills and practicing, and whenever we send kids home with homework, these are some ways that we can actually teach them how to do this retrieval. So some of the research on retrieval practice, this all comes from Powerful Teaching. If you have not read this, this is a great PLC book that you could do with a small group. This is a high school college student section over here. So I put the graph together just so hopefully it'll be easy for us to understand. So the premise of this was that we had a group of students, they reread a passage over and over again to learn content. And then they were going to take a quiz on it. So they might have read it 2, 3, or 4 times. And then the retrieval group only read the passage 1 time. And then what they did is they recorded all that they could remember about the passage. So they read it once, closed the passage, sat down, and just did a brain dump of every single thing they could remember. That retrieval practice strengthened their neurons. What ended up happening in the data is 5 minutes after, that rereading group had a much higher score. And the retrieval group had a slightly lower score. So we're looking at 83% to 71%. But a week later, whenever our brains start to prune those neurons, the group that did the rereading only remembered about half of what they had read initially, where the retrieval group retained more of that information over time. So, strengthening neurons is going to increase that long-term memory by doing this style of retrieval practice. And in this book, you're going to see over and over again with different grade levels of groups and different content areas that this long-term memory is the biggest benefit for retrieval practice. So this one is a set of elementary students. They were sixth graders, all with the same teacher. The teacher ran an experiment with two separate groups, so probably like a group A and a group B. What ended up happening was they had some end of chapter assessments and end of semester assessments. So the group that had retrieval practice at the end of each lesson ended up scoring 94%. And then at the end of the semester, they were at 79%. Whereas the group that just did the standard lesson, where we go through like, here's the objective, here's the lesson content, here's the practice, and we're done, that group retained 81%, and then at the end of the semester, 61%. So this daily retrieval practice boosted their short-term achievement and their long-term growth achievement. And that was with the sixth grade group, so like middle school. We'll see that over and over and over again. We can boost short-term and long-term working memory and long-term memory through this process. And so here are some of the benefits. I'm not going to talk through all of them, but some of the things is that it increases higher order thinking and transfer of knowledge. When we bring forth different pieces to have kids retrieve and remember and share what they remember, it starts to strengthen those connections, and they can see more connections between the content that we're teaching. So they're able to have more of those higher order thinking conversations. One of the big benefits that students noted in the book was increased metacognition and self-awareness strategies. They could tell you better what they knew and what they did not know. They could see the gaps in their own understanding, and then they could target their work into filling those gaps. So there was more motivation moving forward to remember content over time. There's also improved mental organization of knowledge. So as students are building out their schema, they're starting to make those connections and pathways. They're able to see how new content relates to old content because they can retrieve and bring that content forward. So here are 3 activities for retrieval practice. I will say these 3 activities are probably best fit for 2nd, 3rd grade and up. If you're going to do retrieval practice with K1-2, you're probably doing more things where they are verbally retrieving rather than writing down all of their content. So strategy 1, I wrote the steps up on the screen as well. Strategy 1 is just to do a brain dump. So we write down everything we can remember on a specific topic or process. We retrieve that information related to a new topic, like a prerequisite skill. So if you're getting ready to teach something new and you say, we're going to bring this forth from your schema, just dump out everything that you currently remember, currently know about this topic. Then they're going to be able to see as new information is given where that connects into those pieces. They can also retrieve information from past lessons to strengthen those connections. So if you've done something previously in your course content, with those younger students, we could also pair share with those small groups. One of the biggest notes on this strategy is that it's not graded. So we're not doing a brain dump to check off what they know or to see what they don't know or to penalize them for missing something. A brain dump strategy can also be really effective at the end of a quiz. So if we give students a quiz and they've got like questions 1 through 5, have them flip it over on the back and say, brain dump everything you remember that you weren't asked on this quiz. So we can actually see everything that they kind of remember and know. Another idea is retrieve taking. So it's a format of note taking. For this one, we teach a lesson as usual. Students listen and participate, but they're not focused on taking notes. That plays into a really big brain-based strategy that kids can't verbally listen and process and write at the same time. It's 2 different areas of our brain. It's better for them to be completely focused on the speaker, to take in those bits of information for 5 to 10 minutes, and then to pause and let them write down everything they remember. Once they've done that, students can share out and teachers can then assess what were the early misconceptions? What are they currently remembering? What do they hear as the most important factors? And then they can build back in and say, oh, I hear that we've missed this most important thing that I want you to remember. And so through this process, we pause, we let them reflect and take their notes the way that they normally would if they were trying to do it while they were listening. And then we just continue on with the lesson as normal. This is a really great strategy too for kids that have working memory issues. So we're thinking about those students with IEPs. Also for students that have some verbal processing issues, this slows that process down so they can really focus and take in new content. And then the last is mini quizzes. These ones, you would create a cumulative basket of topics. And so as you progress throughout the year, you would take one question per strip of paper. And then whenever you're wanting to do these retrieval mini quizzes, you'd say, okay, get out a piece of paper, write down the numbers 1 to 5. You randomly pull out 5 questions. So you're spiraling previous content, but it's in a random order. You read each question aloud, students respond on their paper, and you collect those mini quizzes. You don't even have to grade them. So you collect them because kids have done this brain dump process and they're like, well, this is what I remember and this is what I think the answer is. And then you just review those answers as a class. And so once you've done that and you've filled in like, oh no, this is the right answer. Oh no, this is here. That act of bringing it back forth allows students to address those misconceptions and strengthen those neurological pathways. Then after you've done that process, you can just return those 5 questions back to the basket and it turns back into like this grab bag situation. The biggest thing about all 3 of these that I'll state again at the end is that these are not graded processes. It's really low stakes. It allows kids to remember and reflect. If we increase the stakes with grades, we can actually push students into that fight, flight, or freeze state. And we want to keep that amygdala really low. We don't want that to impact their memory because then they're not going to remember effectively. So this is just a way to strengthen those connections over time. And so some simple tools that you can use, lots of these are in teachers' classrooms already. You can use personal whiteboards so they can share what they know. They can do a brain dump. They can draw their brain with like where their schema connections are. You can do note cards as selection cards. So every student can have an A, B, C, D or a true, false, a 1, 2, 3. You can very quickly practice retrieval with even like certain types of testing style questions. So I was with a school yesterday and they said that they're going to start using the Missouri testlets as a way to practice retrieval. So they're going to take a question out of each section of the testlet and use that as like a warm up or an exit ticket where kids are practicing that style. And then of course, notebook paper or scrap paper works great too. So this does not take big amounts of resources or materials. It just takes intentional planning and then spiraling back to that content. So one way that you can do that to be really focused using our MAT tools is that if you're going to do that during like a bell work or a morning meeting, circle time, lesson warm-ups, those little tiny clips of time, within the MAT tools, what I would start to look through is last year or last unit. So if I want those prerequisite skills that kids needed that they need to refresh from the previous year or years, I would start building a question a day, or if you're going to do this 3 times a week, you'd have something where they need to remember from time past. But we never shame kids for like losing that memory, or we're like, well, I know you learned this, because that puts them back into that heightened amygdala state where they have that fight, flight, or freeze. Our brains are meant to forget, so we're not going to punish them for forgetting. We just want to work on that process of retrieving that. So we've got last year, last unit, and then our current unit. So this would be like our level 2 or level 3 in the MAT tools. We can use those, the bullet points to say these are the subtopics that kids should be using for this current unit. You could also use, if you teach 4th grade or higher, you could use the Missouri testlets the previous year for this top one, and then your current year for this current unit. And then what I did when I was teaching in the classroom is I would use the 3rd question for a prerequisite skill for a future unit, specifically if I know it's the hardest unit of the year. So when I taught Algebra 1, my kids oftentimes struggled with systems of equations or quadratic functions. I would do types of activities that would prepare them to be ready for whenever I got to that harder content. So for these, you could use those level 2s. You could also start to look at the level 4 from the previous grades. And so you could fill in content here as well. So what I would do is I would go locate those contents in the MAT tool on the scale and then look over in the assessment style questions that we provide for you and use those to support building out this type of style. The fourth grade team I was working with, this is what they do every single day. So for their morning meeting for math time and then their morning meeting for ELA time, they do 3 questions a day. One from the previous unit or previous school year, one for their current unit, and then to build up a skill for an upcoming unit. And they've seen dramatic increases in achievement for their fourth graders this year already. I should have clicked the button to show the math tools. So this is what I was saying with our level 3 that you can use that for the current unit. And then our level 2, you could either back up into our last unit or into that prerequisite skill for a future unit. Okay, some important notes for effective implementation. I've said this a couple of times, but we want to allow students space to forget some information. When they forget and bring it back forth, it's going to be stronger than if we spiral the same content every single day. We can sometimes think that more exposure is going to lead to long-term memory, but back at the beginning of this call, whenever we looked at the high school college students, they reread the same text over and over and over. So they were exposed to that content more, and it didn't lead to long-term memory. We want to provide what's called spacing and interleaving. Spacing means that we're going to provide gaps to allow them to reduce some of their memory load in order to bring it back forth and strengthen that connection. Interleaving means that we're going to mix up the topics. So rather than always having a geometry question on Mondays and always having a drawing conclusions question on Tuesday, rather than doing that, we want to mix it up and we want to interleave those together so that students don't get into the pattern of like, well, we always do this because that doesn't produce those same memory benefits. We also don't want to shame students who forget. We just want to know that this is a normal part of the brain cycle. So over here, these are those little characters from Inside Out that are like, forget it, and they're taking out the memories that we don't need. We don't want to shame students because that's how our brains work. It's meant to be that way. Low stakes and no stakes works best. So although there are some times that I've had conversations and teachers are like, but I need to hold kids accountable. I understand that, but the best way to build memory is to not tie grades to that retrieval practice. Low stakes, no stakes builds confidence over time, and they're going to be able to produce those results long term. And then this is really great within the book, is the section on teaching students the purpose of retrieval. Kids will start to feel more motivated because they'll have more success over time and they'll understand how their brain works so that they know, okay, if I want to practice this skill, it's actually better not to wait until the night before the test. It's better to do a little bit on Monday and then wait and then do a little bit more on Wednesday and build up my brain's memory over time to prepare for that big test on Friday. So they can start to learn and take ownership over their memory process to become a better student. And then lastly, to follow up with some additional resources. So this is Powerful Teaching. This is the one where there's a lot of brain science. It's a pretty quick read for as large of a book as it is, but it's got real teachers, real content. You can see it across the learning span. And then the other 2 books I would bring up is Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. This talks a lot about how our amygdala can block us learning new content and then the different ways that our brain learns content. So in increasing that encoding process and storage process. And then Zaretta Hammond also has a lot of really great ways to scaffold learning and support to build independent learners. This book, Total Participation Techniques, is one of my favorite books for teachers because if you're going to do retrieval practice, we don't want to just call on one student or 2 students. We want all kids to see that same benefit. So this book has lots of strategies for ensuring that every single learner in the classroom is really involved and connected in that learning process. And so with that, I want to thank you for your time today. If you have questions or want to learn more or like identify some additional resources, feel free to email. And if you have any questions, feel free to stay on. But other than that, that ends our time today. Thank you.